So it is after 6:30. I'll start by introducing myself, and our topic today is the less people join. But thank you for taking some time out of your evening to join. My name is Eric Bennis. I'm one of the financial consultants here on the team at John Graham and Associates. John Graham and Associates has been working with the diocese, well, for over a couple decades now on the 403B program. Every fall, depending on the region that you work in. We've got our team coming out to meet with you, provide advice, review the accounts, etc. I know for the last couple of years, I've been out in the more western regions a lot. We also have some team members. You'll see their faces here in a moment. Scott and Nick are involved. Nathan is involved as well, if those names happen to ring a bell. But we've been helping with the 403B program for now a long time. We get a lot of common questions. And, oh, see, we've got a hand raise here. Hand raise. I'm not seeing a question. I saw somebody raise their hand. But if you do want to type in a question, there is a chat box in the bottom. And so I'll be able to read that one. I'm not seeing a question though presently. But the reason that we wanted to do this presentation is because we meet with so many people and there's a lot of common questions. And honestly, as part of our job, right, we are financial planners. Part of that is retirement planning. Enabled closed captioning. If we're having any technical difficulties, let me know because I see somebody's trying to communicate here. But yeah, we deal with a lot of financial planning, a lot of retirement planning. We wanted to provide an educational presentation tonight of things that need to be on your radar as you approach retirement. So this is not necessarily an exhaustive list of every detail of how you get it done, although I do hope that it's very educational and it should go into a lot of those details. But what it really is we want to shine a light on what's important to have top of mind, right? You might be going into retirement knowing exactly what to do about Social Security, but there might be a blind spot that you weren't thinking of that we're going to bring up and say, hey, this needs to be on your radar. It needs to be something that's important to you in order to have a successful retirement. So we're going to cover a lot of topics tonight, try to provide some valuable insight. As I had briefly mentioned, because I think somebody was trying to type a response, is there is a chat box at the bottom. I haven't seen any chats pop up yet, but at the end of the presentation, I will absolutely pause, go back through. If there's any questions, I will answer them. If I happen to not know an answer, I'll follow up with you. If you have a confidential type question, a little bit too detailed, then we can talk one-on-one. But I think that this will be very informative. If you want to take notes, absolutely, you're welcome to. So let's go through it together and keep a tally of what was on your radar. What was new information that we need to think about? All right. I see that somebody raised a hand. I'm going to double check to see if in order to prevent going back and forth, I'm going to go ahead and present. And then if you do have a chat, please type it in. I see that somebody has raised a hand a couple times, but I don't see any chats in the column there. So if you do have a question, please type it out. And let me go back to sharing my screen. I think it'll just lend it to a smoother experience if we do the questions all at the end. So these are some of our team members. Not everybody's included. I had mentioned Nathan's a big part of helping with the diocese, but these are some common faces that you may or may not recognize. So first we wanted to find, what are we trying to talk about here? So we want to talk about Social Security is probably top of mind with anybody going into retirement. Pension benefits though, right? Because a lot of us are going to have TRS. So whether you came to the diocese from the public school system or not, those that did probably are going to have some type of TRS benefit. You might have a buyout opportunity. You might have monthly income that you need to calculate. I don't know how many years you were in the TRS system or what tier you were hired under. They have multiple tiers. But those are things to think about. Retirement plan benefits, right? If you're in the diocese and you're nearly full-time employment, or even part-time at this point, you can have the 403(b) program. And so that 403(b), in addition to any outside accounts you may have, is going to contribute to the retirement picture. We want to talk about income. Number one, sustainability of that income, making sure it lasts, but also how to structure it, right? Because we know in the background of all of this, there's taxes, and there are more and less efficient ways to structure your income, not just with consideration for yourself and for your spouse, but also for the next generation, if that's important to you to have something to pass on. Healthcare costs. Healthcare is rapidly rising in cost, much faster than, food costs or housing costs or anything. Healthcare far and away outpaces those with inflation. And the emotional readiness that it takes to go into retirement so that we still have a purpose, have a reason to get up in the morning. So we covered a lot of the big picture here, but there are some details as well. We want to talk about investing principles. We've met with a lot of you over the years looking at your 403(b), but your 403(b) is just one piece of the picture. And even if your 403(b) is a larger piece of the picture for you, if you've saved very diligently and that's going to be primarily where you draw your income from, it's very important that it's set up in a way that will lend to a successful retirement, right? We need good investment principles, and we'll dive into that tonight. A safe withdrawal strategy or a sustainable withdrawal strategy. Talking about tax efficiency, being aware of inflation and really what to expect going forward and how to combat that. We, of course, want to be cognizant of where we're going to live, right? If you live in Illinois and you plan to move to, let's say, Tampa Bay to retire, you're probably not going to have a one-to-one exchange selling your house and buying a new one, right? You're probably going to have to take on a mortgage or take a lump sum out of what you've saved in order to get that house in Tampa Bay. Go through some estate planning because that's incredibly important. I know for a lot of people it's a back burner item, but for us it is not. It's something that's very important and actually ties into wealth management as well. And then of course the additional considerations of if this is not your forte, or if this is something that, is very important to you, but you're not sure exactly how to do it perfectly, work with an advisor. That's why we're here. This is what we do all day long, and we'll try to connect you with some resources as well. So when we first started thinking about this presentation, we all sat down, and this was pretty much the slide that was on our mind. We were thinking, what's important to everybody else? What are the common questions that we need to make sure are answered? So here's some questions that we came up with that hopefully resonate with you in some way. I get asked all the time, how much do I need to retire? And the response, of course, is a terrible response, which is that there is no one answer. It's based on your needs and your situation. But let's at least unpack that. And so you can start to define for yourself, what are my needs? What is my situation? And from there, hopefully come up with a good number. How should we allocate what we have, right? We have different types of assets. We have assets positioned differently. When should I take Social Security? We have choices there, and anytime that you have a choice, theoretically, you could make a better or a worse choice. So we want to make sure that we're making wise choices here. What if my health in the future isn't what it is today? If it's already not fantastic, then at least that's on our radar. But for a lot of people, it's not something you think about until things change. The question of, should I carry life insurance when I'm retired? I mean, I have it now. Maybe I've still got kids in the house, but what about down the road? What about if my kids are moved out, my mortgage is paid, should I still keep it? And what should I know about estate planning? So here's some things to think about. If you decide to retire early, there's going to be some negatives to that, I'll say. Fewer accumulation years means you will have less time in the market. I don't know if you've ever heard the phrase time in the market beats timing the market, but essentially what that phrase means is if you have even decent investments, don't have to be brilliant with it, but if you put them in there and you're patient, they should double and double and double. Let's say you retire at 60, and you had, let's say, $500,000. Well, realistically, if you had waited till 70, with a wise asset allocation, it's very realistic to say that your $500,000 would have become $1 million by the time you hit 70, given an additional 10 years. So you're going to have less accumulation, and you're going to, if you are touching the amount that you have invested for income, you're going to not only pause the accumulation, you're going to begin to draw it down. And so it's not that you can't retire early, it's that you need to have an asset allocation that lines up with being able to provide income and hopefully actually grow and not shrink. You're going to have a longer distribution period, because just because you retire earlier doesn't mean that you die earlier. You just have a longer retirement. And so we all consume things, we all have health costs, and prices go up over time. And so you have to think about, if I'm going to retire today, there's a good chance I'm going to be around here, you know, when I'm 88 years old, when I'm 90 years old. How am I going to pay for things? If you have fewer accumulation years and a longer distribution period, it's incredibly important that you work with somebody to spread your assets out over your lifetime. And if it's important to you to leave a legacy to the next generation, then it's that much more important to have a strategy. Now, I think a lot of us have heard if you take Social Security early, there's a reduction. We'll go through the details of that, but that's certainly a consideration. And then healthcare costs, right? Because Medicare, you can get that when you're 65. If you retire at 62, there's going to be a gap there. Maybe you go on COBRA, which is quite expensive. Maybe you private pay just on your own, looking for a health plan on the market. Maybe you have a spouse that continues working. That's part of that whole strategy, right? Of, you know, my husband works, but I'm able to retire sooner. We go on his health insurance, no problem. Whatever it is, though, you should be thoughtful about it. And a potential pension reduction, especially if you're in TRS. Okay. So how much annual income will you need? I didn't look at the names of everybody who joined tonight, but of course, within the diocese, there are many, many priests, and priests are in a unique situation because most Americans, we come out of college or trade school or whatever, we get married, we have a family, we get a house, we pay off that mortgage, we enter retirement either in the last years of our mortgage or not having a mortgage. Priests join the priesthood, they stay at the rectory, and when they retire, they get to take on a mortgage or begin renting, one of the two, which is very inverted from the average American's experience. But that's something to consider. If you're thinking about retirement, is am I going to have fixed costs taking on a mortgage? Or am I going to be a renter where my costs are somewhat at the mercy of inflation rates and my landlord and how he adjusts based on inflation? Now, for other people who don't have a mortgage, your costs are probably going to go down. You don't have kids anymore. You don't have a mortgage anymore. But generally, your cost of living is still going to be between 60 and 90% of what it is. Now, there's an additional reduction in what you spend, which is you're no longer saving. People might be putting, 4% into their 403(b). Well, that's not going to happen anymore. There's no need to save. You're actually taking income now. If you were saving above and beyond that, that's all going to pause as well. We recommend, last bullet point here, list your expenses. If you've never done a family budget for yourself, we highly recommend it because at least it gives you a ballpark of what to expect. And if there's something you uncover of, hey, this is going to go away in 3 years, right? I just bought a car and my car is going to be paid off in 3 years, and that's the last car I ever want to buy. Hey, that's going to free up some cash. Or I don't know what you'll find, but whenever we do budgets with people, we uncover things that they weren't expecting, and it adds a lot of clarity because then we're able to do the math of what do you need? What is the inflation rate on those things? Here's how we plan for that. And it makes things nice and easy. So we're going to have several sources of income. Some may or may not apply to you, but Social Security or pensions, for example, TRS, is going to apply to a lot of people, but people can collect both in some situations, especially if you had summer jobs, things like that. Income from assets, a lot of times that looks like rental property. If you have maybe a home that you rent out to somebody else. Income from earnings as well, that's going to be your investments. And other, I don't know whether that's gifting from from another generation or inheritance, something like that. But the point is, we're going to have different sources. And what's not written on the slide is that each source is going to have its own tax code attached to it, which means that some are going to be more favorable to spend today, some are going to be more favorable to delay into the future to take. So here's a few key risks. I really like this slide just because it breaks down what we're up against. I think I'm not exactly a pessimist, but I like to say that I'm a realist. One of my favorite ways of thinking of problems is what could go wrong and what can we do to prepare for that potential thing that could go wrong and make sure it doesn't. So to me, this is sort of laying out a roadmap of, okay, these are things that could go wrong. Now let's come back to these, make a plan for each one to make sure you have a successful and happy retirement. So number one, longevity. We'll go through that here in a moment, but basically, there's a lot of humble people. I meet with a lot of humble people who say, oh, I'm not going to make it that long. Guess what? You probably will. Um, and that's okay. You just have to plan for it. People are living longer and longer, even when they don't expect to. And so you have to assume that what is a gallon of milk these days, like 250 or something. By the time that you're ready to pass away, a gallon of milk could be $7, $8 because you're going to live that long and inflation is going to take its toll. And that's risk number 3 right there is inflation. As long as you have time on this earth, inflation is going to be an issue that we're up against. So whatever we have, we need to either keep pace with or outpace inflation. Risk number 2 is healthcare expenses. As we get older, our healthcare expenses statistically are going to increase. So not only are we going to be on a somewhat fixed income because we're no longer working, our expenses are going to shoot up at some point. And healthcare expenses have historically outpaced inflation. If there's 2 things that rapidly outpace normal inflation, it's college and healthcare, 2 very expensive things. So that needs to be on our radar. Risk number 4 is asset allocation. When you're retired, your investments really should not be set it and forget it. It should be something where you work with an advisor and you say, what is the strategy for this bucket of money? Maybe you have 3 buckets of money, maybe you have multiple buckets of money. And each one has a purpose and a specific asset allocation to make sure that we're maximizing not only the tax code, but also the things that you can own within your 403b IRA, any other type of account that you have to make sure it lasts. And risk number 5 somewhat ties in with risk number 4, which is excess withdrawal. That can look like a couple things. It can just be overusing accounts to the point that you're drawing down faster than it can replace what you take. It can also look like taking at the wrong time, right? If you retired in 2008, right, as the housing bubble burst, the market crashed, it was not a good time. That was a very difficult time to retire, right? Because anybody who had patience would have recovered within a couple of years. They would have been okay in terms of their investments. But somebody who retired and needed income during those years, hopefully they had a good plan in place. These are the kind of things that can go wrong. And honestly, when you meet with an advisor, we should assume that these things go wrong. We should assume that there's a recession. How do we plan for that? Well, there's ways of putting buffers in the account and protecting them. You should be fine as long as you have a plan in place. So going back to that first risk of longevity, statistically, if you and your spouse both make it past 65, one of you will make it to 90. So that means a couple things. Number one, you got to buy a lot of food between 65 and 90 to make it there. You got to pay a lot of property taxes. You got to just spend a lot of money in order to live that long. Not only that, everything that you're buying keeps getting more and more expensive year over year. So when I say that I work with a lot of humble people, that's true. Most people look at this and say, nah, that's not me. I'm not going to make it there. But I also work with a lot of people between 85 and 95 years old. So a lot of people actually do make it there. And with medicine improving, you're probably going to make it there too. And we need to just assume that you do. There's a phrase in financial planning, which is invest as though you're going to live forever, but buy insurance as though you're going to die tomorrow. And what that means is basically cover your bases, right? If you need your investments to pay for your everyday living, you need to assume you're going to be here a long time and plan for that. And for those people who have needs where insurance is necessary, you need to assume that you're going to actually use that insurance. So get the right amount. Okay. Historically, we've had 3% inflation. This is going back to the Great Depression. Yes, the last couple of years have been much more severe, but we're taking the historic average um, just to illustrate an example here, which is assuming 3%. We've got 50,000 stuff today. 25 years later, it's going to cost you $104,000 to go to the store and buy the same stuff. So think about it, if you retire at 65, by the time that you hit 90 years old, the same $50,000 worth of things is going to cost more than double. And as we just established, there's a statistical probability that you hit 90 years old after retiring at 65. So in order to solve that issue, let's look at what kind of investments do we have in the asset allocation to outpace inflation, but still protect your investment. Specific investment and product choices. So we're talking about how are accounts coded, right? How are they treated within the IRS tax code? Withdrawal rate, we want to make something that's either sustainable or in line with your goals. Some people say, I want to spend my last dollar by tipping the guy who carries my coffin to the grave. That's some people. Other people say, I want to leave a legacy to the grandkids, to my kids, whatever it might be. So we need to make sure that your accounts are in line with your goals. Order of withdrawals, going back to tax code and goal planning, and understanding that at a certain point you're going to have required minimum distributions, whether you really want to or not. So that needs to be accounted for, those withdrawals. So there's two big phases in life, which is your working phase and your income phase. Another way to say that is accumulation versus distribution. At one point you're saving, at the other point you're spending. So when you start spending, very few people spend all at once, right? If you've saved, let's say $250,000 in your 403B, and I know you're going to have a savings account, a checking account, et cetera, but for simplicity, let's talk about the 403B. You're not going to spend all 250 all at once. So because of that, we're going to have at least two buckets, if not more. Number one being immediate income, hopefully protected and ready to send to you on a monthly, yearly, whatever basis. And long-term returns, your long-term bucket, which is all that excess that there's no way you could spend in a couple years. So when we think about asset allocation, we want to manage the volatility in an appropriate way because volatility works in our favor. Remember, volatility is a word that means up and down. It's like a roller coaster. Roller coasters don't just go down, they also go up. So we want a certain amount of volatility in our portfolio, especially for that long-term bucket, because we want that to be growing. And we want almost no volatility if possible for our short-term bucket, because that's the money that's coming to us. And going back to that 2008 example, you'd hate to have to withdraw during a down period. So there needs to be at least some of your assets protected as non-volatile. And of course, we want to keep pace with inflation, because if you have $100 today and it's in cash and you stick it under your mattress, next year you pull out that $100 bill, it's worth $97. These days it might be worth $96, $95 because inflation ate up purchasing power. If we invest, some products are going to just barely keep pace with inflation, and some types of investments are going to outpace inflation and actually create wealth. So this page shares three general buckets, and I think this is a good starting point as a framework to approach your retirement income situation. This is not just for your 403B. This is for all of your wealth together, because you can have many types of accounts, but they're all going to fall into one of these realms. Number one is going to be your protected money. Number two is going to be your income producing money. So semi-stable but growing. And number three, growth potential. That's going to be your long-term, more volatile money that works in your favor to create wealth. So you see that there's different types of products to think about: CDs, FDIC insured CDs, money market funds. We do money markets here. with interest rates being high and our money market having a very good return, a lot of people have actually moved a lot of their cash savings, right? Instead of keeping a large savings account at the bank, they've moved it to a money market fund because money markets are safe and stable, but they have a high rate of return to them. So that's one way of dealing with cash management, trying to keep pace with inflation, but not take on risk. Generating income, we can look at bonds. We can also look at income producing mutual funds to add that diversification versus a single bond. And fixed annuities, which are insurance products that act very much like a CD for various intervals of time, just like a CD, whether it's 2 years or 5 years, etc. And then we want to look at growth, and historically, the best form of growth that you can get within an account would be through stocks. Now, stocks don't have to be individually purchased. They can be through mutual funds. If you have a 403(b), you have mutual funds. You already do this. But the question is, are those the right funds for retirement? Do they fit with these buckets of long-term versus income producing versus stable? And then lastly, variable annuities, which are also insurance products. They can come with certain considerations, whether that could be a higher fee, but a larger death benefit or some type of trade-off like that. Sometimes they're appropriate, and a lot of times people don't need them. But that's why you dive into your specific situation first. This slide is talking about the fact that depending on how you spend funds and the situations that you find yourself in, year over year is going to impact your ability to sustain your account until you pass away or to the next generation. So some people get lucky. Some people retire at an all-time market high and they enjoy decent markets throughout retirement. We don't have a crystal ball and you don't have that control. So what we'd rather do instead of hope for the best is create a spending policy that under pretty much any condition is going to sustain your account and give you peace of mind. At a very rudimentary level, 4% has been the go-to withdrawal rate if you want to say set it and forget it. So what I mean by that is, let's say you have $1 million. We'll use a round number. $1 million in an investment account, depending on asset allocation, should be growing. And if you could spin off 40,000 a year in income to yourself off of that, that's going to be 4% of the total. Now that's if you're doing year after year after year, whether it's a recession or a record high or a flat year or anything. And by doing that, you should be able to have that account last you well throughout retirement and honestly beyond into the next generation. When you go above 4%, you begin to risk invading your principal and slowly seeing the amount of your account decline. And you, realistically speaking, you're entering a race of do I die first or does my account die first? Now, there's ways to be a bit more hands-on and a bit more controlling of this. For example, you don't have to take 4% every single year, right? You can meet with your advisor, say, hey, it's an up year. I want to take 6% because that's okay. We made 9% this year. 6 is fine. But I've got a savings account, right? And next year, if there is a recession, I'm not going to take anything. I'm going to go down to 0% and I'm going to spend out of my savings account, right? There are levels of complication to this, and it's up to you what you want to do. A lot of people say, give me 4%. I want to go enjoy my retirement. I don't want to think about it. But for those people who really want to be hands-on, that's an example of how to have those specific adjustments year over year. So there was a study called the Brinson study that ultimately determined what you own matters a lot. If you own good things, then that pretty much determines your outcome. If you own bad things, that's going to harm you. So over 90% of a portfolio's return is determined by asset allocation. Having an IRA or having a 403(b) is not enough. It's owning good things within those accounts that are appropriate to your needs. That is what makes the account not only survive, but grow over time and provide for you. Now, this is the part for some people that's fun and the part that's not fun for other people, right? I enjoy this. That's why I do what I do, because portfolio construction and asset allocation is something that we're good at. That's why a lot of people work with us. Other people don't enjoy that part. Either it's overwhelming or they just don't have the time of day, right? Say, I'm teaching class, I don't want to learn about mutual funds. This is where working with an advisor allows you to outsource that. Now, it is possible to do on your own, but in our experience, that has a lot of risks along with it because if it's not something you do full time, it can turn into more of a hobby. And to put simply, you don't know what you don't know, and there's some pitfalls there to watch out for. Um, This is a little bit in the weeds, but I think it's important to bring up because a lot of people have assumptions about what their retirement should look like. There is a general, well, I don't want to say consensus, but feeling that as you get older, you should be more conservative. If you talk to the average American, I think they're going to agree with that. And from our experience working with 401ks and 403bs and retirement plans, that's what people believe. I've kind of labeled it a stoplight approach of green, you're young and saving. Yellow, you're approaching retirement. You need to be more cautious. Red, you're in retirement. You better be conservative. That's very simplistic and it doesn't tell the whole story of what's possible within an account or what's appropriate because it's not so much about age, it's about income needs, right? If you saved money specifically with the intent that it goes to the grandkids, nobody cares whether you're 60 years old or 80 years old. That's the grandkids' money in your mind, and you need to invest accordingly. Same thing with if you have $500,000 and you're 65 years old. You're not spending $500,000 this year. You're wanting that money to last you over your entire retirement. That means you have a time frame of multiple decades. So you need to have a more aggressive approach with a portion of it and a more conservative approach with another portion of it. When people say that they're more conservative, a lot of times the word conservative gets conflated with owning bonds. This screen is here to show you that while bonds do have their place, a lot of misconceptions are around what a bond can do versus what a stock can do. Bonds, in our opinion, are for stability. Bonds do have a yield, a coupon payment to go along with them. And a lot of people use that coupon payment as income. That being said, so do stocks. The top line here, the dark line, is the Barclays US Ag Bond Index. This is a snapshot of many, many American bonds. And it shows that the bond yields over time have declined to become very much in line with stock yields. Bonds are at about 2.41% average, whereas the stocks have a yield of about 2.21, so slightly less, but very close. The difference between the two is a bond is for stability. A bond has a yield, so you have stability and income. Those are the two good things going for it. What you don't have is a whole lot of wealth creation because stability means less volatility, means less growth. Now, a stock, here we have the Dividend Aristocrats Index, meaning these are companies that have paid dividends for 25 plus years. They are paying a yield, a dividend of 2.21% on average, but they also have upside potential, meaning the ability to increase in price and grow your wealth over time. So you're not just getting your dividend, you're getting wealth creation, AKA outpacing inflation and growing your portfolio. So if you're somebody taking 4% off of a portfolio, would you rather have bonds for a majority that are hopefully keeping pace at 4%, but probably not realistically? Or would you rather have equities, which are going to grow faster than 4% historically and pay you the same yield, very close to the same yield as a bond? Well, for a good portion of your portfolio, it would make sense to get those dividend paying equities. Bonds, of course, still have their place for stability, but not as big of a place as we have seen other people think they should have. It has nothing to do with your age in correlation to bonds. It has to do with your income needs. This is very similar to the prior slide, but it's an iteration of what your portfolio could look like. So this assumes you start with $1 million in 1990. Pretend you're retiring in 1990. And the reason it has to go backwards is because this is true historical data. And we hesitate to make projections. So this is truly what would have happened if you retired in 1990. You start with $1 million and you're taking income. You're taking, I believe it's 50,000 a year. If you had a bond portfolio, the bonds are going to produce a very good yield, but over time, it's going to lag the total return of the stocks. You see that the stock portfolio by the end of it all in 2020 is worth $17,497,000. The bond portfolio is worth 1.2 million. It really did not create wealth. It did a very good job of maintaining, and I'll bet you that the ups and downs were slightly smoother, but the ups were very small in comparison to the equity portfolio and how much it went up. But also think about the fact that on this prior page, bond yields are 2.41, equity yields are 2.2. That's a percentage. That means, I mean, think about it, 2% of 100 is 2, but 2% of 200 is 4. So if you can increase the size of your portfolio, you increase the amount of money in your pocket. So here, if you're making about 2%, that's equity income of $386,000 because your portfolio grew. If your portfolio is stagnant and stable, 2% remains, well, it starts off at 20,000, 2% of $1 million. And then over time, because it grew to 1.2 million, now it's $29,613. So when we think in terms of percentages, it really encourages us to grow the account because the percentage you take, even if that's 4%, 4% becomes a bigger number year over year as long as your account grows. In this example, this is somebody taking 50,000 a year. They retire with $1 million. You see that initially, on the left-hand side here where it says 1990, they dip into principal a little bit. 50,000 is more than 4%, right? 4% being 40,000. So they're going to spend a little bit of the principal, but they have good asset allocation and it grows, and they're in dividend paying stocks. And so the underlying very light pink at the bottom of the bar chart, that's their principal investment. And the red that grows significantly as you head towards the right side of the chart, that is the dividend production. And you see that very soon, instead of spending principal, they're having more dividends come in than they can spend. So by the end of it, they have so much excess dividends that the dividends are probably 2/3 more than their principal in terms of account value. That's why we really want to hammer home the fact that just because you're going to retire, don't turn around and put your whole account in bonds. Bonds have their place for protecting that income you're about to take, but they don't need to cover the whole account. Dividend paying equities is a better route for most people for wealth creation. So we've kind of dug into some of the very minute details of asset management, but let's talk about how this would apply to the various accounts out there, because we're not just the 403B managers for the diocese. We help people with everything that they have. We are true financial planners, and we want to look at the whole picture. So we may have savings. Like I mentioned before, would you rather have a savings account making 0.1%, or a money market account making 4%, 4.5%, or CDs? That's a great conversation to have, because if the two are equally safe, a lot of times it comes down to return. Your 403B, I think we've hammered that home quite a bit. Social Security, we'll get into that here in a moment. Traditional IRAs and Roth IRAs. The difference being how they're taxed and how they were treated at contribution time. Also, depending on when you establish the Roth IRA, there is a 5-year timeline of having that open before you take income. But that's a little bit of minutia there. So depending on what types of accounts you have, they're going to be treated different for tax reasons. If you have a bunch of CDs, right, your interest on those CDs are counted as income. If you have an account that owns Pepsi and Caterpillar, those are the two companies you bought back in the day and you held them forever, and you've got very good gains on it. Well, those gains would be treated as capital gains, and that's a different type of tax. You have tax deferred accounts like your 403B, where you put in 5,000 and you got a tax deduction the year that you put it in. You got 5,000 off of your taxes. But now it's grown, and when you take it back out, it's going to count as income. Now, something to consider with these tax deferred accounts is your tax bracket can change year to year. If you're not working, there's a good chance your tax bracket falls. If you're married and you're not working 1 year, but then your spouse is going to retire the year following, it might be wise to spend your 403B after your spouse retires, right? To get that tax benefit and spend one of these other accounts first, whether that's savings or non-qualified investment accounts or something. And then you have tax exempt accounts like Roth IRAs. Um, a Roth IRA is very beneficial. In a lot of instances, it would be one of the last accounts that you want to touch. If there's something that you want to pass on in an inheritance, it would likely be a taxable account, such as a non-qualified stock account. The Caterpillar Pepsi example I said, that would be a great inheritance. It would also be a great way to gift if you are involved with gifting to your church or to any other cause, really any nonprofit. Those are fantastic ways to avoid taxes for yourself and to give a meaningful gift. But also Roth IRAs are very good inheritance as well because they're tax exempt versus gifting an IRA or a 403B to the next generation comes with a hefty tax for that heir that inherits the account. These are things that we dive into on a one-on-one basis. I don't want to spend too much time on it, but when thinking about order of withdrawal, um, come to your financial advisor with what you have, all of your accounts, and from there we can develop a plan of what makes sense to take first. When you retire, it's very, very likely that you should move your 403B into an IRA. A 403B is primarily set up for the people who are still accumulating, who are still working and who are trying to grow the investments. 403Bs have limited investment options. They have, well, you've probably seen them before. On the form, you've got about maybe 15, 20 fund choices, and that's about it. That's because they need to limit it, make it reasonable for all the employees, and have good oversight to make sure that what is offered is trustworthy and appropriate. But in retirement, your needs might not match the needs of a 45-year-old teacher who's saving, right? I'm surprised this was a poll that was taken. I'm surprised that only 13% said they wanted more investment options. As advisors, this is the #1 reason that we advocate for moving your 403B into an IRA. You don't want to invest as though you're 30 years old and not taking income, because that's not realistic. You are taking income and you're probably 65, 70 years old. So we want to buy the best, strongest companies possible. And we want to buy, if we're going for funds, exactly the fund that fits your situation, not a compromise. Now, of course, there's other benefits, right? Consolidation, that's nice, keeping track of things like that. Keeping the money under your own ownership versus being tied to a former employer. If you haven't worked there in 20 years, it's just harder to deal with that. So there's a lot of reasons to roll over to an IRA. My favorite reason, and what I think is the most logical reason, is you're going to have more investment options and tailor your account to your needs. Now, when you hit 73, the IRS is going to make you take out pre-tax money. So if you have a traditional IRA, if you have a 403B with pre-tax contributions, which you do, you're going to need to take some out. There's a calculation to it. When you work with us, we just do that calculation for you. We make sure it happens automatically. It goes to you. It's fairly easy. If you were to DIY it on your own, though, you need to be aware of this because there's penalties if you don't do it within the appropriate time frame. You also need to have that appropriate asset allocation to predict the fact that you're going to take a withdrawal. If it's 2008 and the housing market has crashed, but you're 75 years old, the IRS does not care. They want their taxes. You have to take a withdrawal. So we need to just assume these are coming because they are, plan for them, and then they won't be a problem when they actually happen. Let's talk about Social Security a little bit. I skipped a slide. I'll go back to it here in a moment. Social Security is a public program that came out of the Depression that was geared for a generation that didn't live as long as we do. Back then, I don't think the average life expectancy was over 70. Now you see that people are living into their 80s and 90s, and you can take Social Security as young as 62. So this is not meant to be the end all of your retirement income. It's supposed to be a source of income paired with other sources. Now you can take it as early as 62. We didn't put it on here, but if you're a widow or a widower, if your spouse has passed away, you can take it at 60. That comes with its own considerations, depending on if you're remarried, things like that. But that option is out there. I had that conversation this morning with a woman whose husband unfortunately passed away, just explaining that whole option and process to her. But there's some things to think about here. Do I take it early or later? Well, there's trade-offs. There's the mathematical equation of what gets me the most money. There's the values question of what sources, what assets do I want to pass on to the next generation, right? Because there are generational type assets like your 403B that can go to a beneficiary. Social Security is not generational. It can go to your spouse, but not the kids. So it's a matter of which type of asset do we spend first, but let's dive into it here. This is the slide I skipped. Social Security, SSA.gov is where you should go as your first step. SSA.gov is going to give you this bar chart. This page has a lot of information on it. Don't worry too much about it. What I wanted to convey was just that this bar chart is going to be there. Take a screenshot, print it out, something like that. You want to bring that to a financial meeting and go through it, because these are going to be the base numbers that we can put into software and do some math for you. It's also going to give you a realistic picture of what to expect. But broadly speaking, between 62 and 70, you're going to have an increase. The longer you wait to take it, the more you make. FRA, or full retirement age, is going to vary depending on your age. But if you were born 1960 or older, your full retirement age is 67. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to take it at 67. It doesn't mean you have to wait till 67. What it really has to do with is whether you can take it and work a job at the same time without consequence. We'll go into that here in a moment. But that's what full retirement age means. It just means 67 for most people. If you were born before 1960, it's going to be 66 and X amount of months, depending on exactly how old you are. So if you collect early, in this scenario, it's actually assuming that their full retirement age is 66. So this person would have been born in the 1950s. So 75% benefit if you're 62, 80% if you're 63, etc. And then 100%, which is the column here on the top right, if your full retirement age, in this case, 66 years old. Now the bottom portion is looking at, hey, I'm 66 in the first column here. I get 100% of my Social Security benefit. But what if I wait until I'm 70? Well, if you're 70, every year between your full retirement age and 70 years old, you get an 8% increase. So they're, in a way, rewarding you for delaying getting into the Social Security system. So you have the potential to make 132% of your full retirement age amount. That's where this math is coming from. Realistically, it's just a number. In this case, look at the bottom chart here. It's 2,634. But that number is 132% of full retirement age. Now there's math to it, and then there's the values side as well. This is the math to it. The reason you need to bring your bar chart to a financial meeting, and if you don't have it, that's fine, but it's going to be a piece of homework before we make a recommendation, is because everybody's numbers are different, right? We all had different jobs. We're all different ages. So this is an example page. This is not a truism saying, hey, you should definitely take it at 79 or 76 or whatever's printed here. This is saying, based on your numbers, this person, if they take it at age 62, they need to live to be 76 years old before it's worth it. In comparing age 70 to age 62, they need to live to be at least 79 years old before it was worth it to wait till 70 and get that increased benefit versus take it at 62 for a reduced benefit, but get it for more years. So not a lot of people know when they're going to die. I've got a couple people who have an idea, but most people don't have an idea. So that's the game that you're playing here, is how long do I live and do I make it worth it? If this person's full retirement age was 66, for example, the final example here where it says break even points right here in the middle on the top right says age 70 versus age 66. Well, if they don't take it at full retirement age, if they wait until 70, they need to live to be 81 years old before it's mathematically worth it for them to have waited and gotten that increased benefit. Another reason it's important to have those bar charts is because when we run these analyses, sometimes the differences are kind of silly, right? This says you need to be 81 years old, but maybe it's a difference of $3,000, right? It's not that big in the grand scheme of things in your entire life. So rather than wait, just take it at, let's say, 69 or 68, if that's the one with the largest gap between the two ages. So it's worth going through that exercise together. Now, full retirement age is that defined period for most people these days. It's 67, but again, if you're born in the 1950s, it's 66 and some odd months. If you want to work while you're under full retirement age, you're going to get a reduction in benefits. They don't want you double dipping, so to speak. So what happens if you're above the limit? Well, $1 benefits is withheld for every $2 that you earn over the annual limit. The 2023 limit said you're safe if you earn under $21,240. So if you, I work with a guy, he repairs ATVs, side-by-sides, four-wheelers, that kind of thing. He makes maybe 5 to 10 grand on that. He's fine. He can take Social Security, be 63 years old, under full retirement age, no problem. But if you're, a teacher, for example, and you're making $35,000, you're well over that limit. We can do the math of whether it's worth it or not, but it's probably not worth it for you to take early and work at the same time. Now, these numbers change. This year it's gone up. It's 22,320. But the point is that you're going to get a reduction, and it's worth doing the math. If you seriously are considering taking Social Security and working, we can do the math of, whether that reduction is actually going to net you a positive amount or not. Now, the year that you reach full retirement age, let's say your full retirement age is 67, and as long as you're making less than 56,000, now this year it's been up to 59,000. If you're under $59,000, then you're pretty much good to go. If you go over, it's a 1 to 3 reduction. So instead of $1 loss for every $2 over, now it's $1 loss for every $3 over. And once you hit full retirement age, then make $1 million for all the government cares. So if you're 68 years old and you want to work a job and collect Social Security, go for it. You can double dip at that point without any penalty. One thing to note is, let's say you decide to pull the trigger anyway, you take your Social Security when you're younger and you work and you take that reduction, the penalty drops off when you hit full retirement age. So it's not like a permanent reduction. It is just for the year that you're receiving it. So your benefit will go back to what it should have been after you hit full retirement age. This is a quick example. Imagine John is 62, which is under full retirement age for all people. And he would have gotten $12,000 if he was only taking Social Security, but he also works and he makes 25 grand. So 25 grand is over the annual limit. These numbers are based on the 2023 limit. So he's about 3,700, almost 3,800 over the limit. He's going to lose 1,800 worth of benefits. And so instead of 12,000, he actually only collects 10,120. Now, when John hits 67, whatever his full retirement age is, he's going to get all $12,000 deposited to him every single month. So something to consider, as a lot of you guys are teachers within the TRS system, is the government pension offset provision and the windfall elimination provision. Basically, there's different types of pensions. We work with Caterpillar people. Caterpillar is a private corporation. You can take the Caterpillar pension and you can take your Social Security, and there's not an issue. We also work with post office workers. Well, there is an issue because that's a government pension program. Same with TRS, which is through the state of Illinois, a government employer. The windfall elimination provision essentially means you're going to take your TRS and you're going to get significantly less Social Security as a result. You're not going to get to double dip, I guess is how they view it. The government pension offset applies if somebody passes away, but their pension passes on to the spouse. So there's plenty of, let me back up and say you're going to have different options offered to you, right? If you take 100% pension benefit, that means you get the maximum amount of money, but if you die, your spouse doesn't get anything. So that may or may not be worth it. You could also take like a 75% provision where your spouse gets 75% of what you were getting if you die, but you get slightly less throughout your retirement. And then there's 50%, et cetera, et cetera. So the government pension offset, if let's say you chose the 50% option and your spouse is now getting 50% of a public pension, whether that's TRS or United, postal workers, or anything else, if you were a judge, cop, something like that, then your spouse is going to get a reduction in their Social Security benefits as well. Now, this isn't on the slide, but it ties back into generational planning and different types of assets. Remember, you've got legacy assets like a Roth IRA, like a 403B, like a bank account. These are assets that can go to really anybody, whether it's a spouse or a kid or a grandkid or an organization. And then you've got assets like pensions and Social Security, which pretty much stops at your death. And if not at your death, then at your spouse's death. So there's things to consider there. Let's say you're 62 and you're just done working. You are going to be taking income. The only choice you really have is where am I taking my income from? You take from Social Security and you preserve your 403B because in this instance, if it's important to you to pass on a legacy, then you don't want to be spending from your generational wealth. You want to spend the government money that stops at your death. Or if you say, hey, that's not as important to me, I'm going to spend my 403B and I'm going to let my Social Security or my pension accumulate more and take it later in life because this 403B is going to go down in value, but the monthly benefit amount of my pension or my Social Security is going to increase up until that 70-year-old point. So these are things to think through. That's the value side. We looked at the math side of it of how long do I have to live before the lines cross and I make more money. There's the value side too of what do you want to leave and what is generational, what isn't. This slide is a lot of numbers, but essentially you have what's called provisional income, and provisional income is just about everything. You're not going to be able to exempt a whole lot of things from your provisional income. So a lot of your Social Security is going to be taxable. It's not taxable in the exact same way of just regular old W-2 income from your job, but it is taxable. And we see here that provisional income includes capital gains, dividends, IRA distributions, rental income from properties, income off of a farm, if you cash rent, all those things are going to play into your total quote unquote provisional income and therefore impact the taxability of your Social Security. What I would anticipate, although it's not completely mathematically accurate, is I would just count your Social Security money as taxable income when you're figuring up what do I need in retirement and what's my take home versus my gross. Technically, the tax rules are laid out here where it's 50% taxable in a certain range, then 85% taxable above, $44,000. So then there's Medicare. And Medicare, while not a tax, if you're getting Part B, that's also going to come out of your Social Security. So that's going to be a reduction there. You're going to get Part A, everybody gets Part A, and you're going to get that at 65 years old. So if you're trying to retire earlier, like I mentioned earlier, you need to plan for how am I going to cover my health bills? Am I getting COBRA? Is my spouse still working and I'm on their program? Or am I paying just through the marketplace out of pocket? So you get Part A. Part B is optional. Most people get Part B, and that comes out of your Social Security, and that's going to help with medical coverage. You could get an Advantage plan, which you see those all over the television, and anytime you drive on an interstate, they're advertising all different types of programs, but that's basically a fill in the gaps type of plan, and a lot of people get them. And those are sold through private companies. Now, those companies are very well regulated. One example might be Humana, that's fairly popular. but that's something that you can go to a Medicare Advantage broker and work with them. We have relationships with those people. We do not directly do Medicare Advantage plans, but we have people that we trust and refer to. And then Part D is if you want prescription drug coverage. I know a lot of people who don't have Part D and pay out of pocket instead. Let's talk about long-term care briefly. Long-term care does not just mean nursing home. That's the kind of the go-to mental image that people have. But it means that you're relying on somebody else to take care of you for any period of time. My grandmother needed long-term care because she broke her knee. She's fine. She's not in a nursing home, but there was a recovery period, right? And then on the flip side, I had a grandfather who had dementia. He absolutely needed long-term care 24/7. To be honest, they locked the doors kind of situation to take care of him and help him stay safe. So going back to surveys and statistics, 70% of people who are 65 are going to need some type of long-term care. Now, the average long-term care stay is about 28 months. That's not a terribly long time. It's less than 3 years. And that accounts for all the highs and lows that average out, right? There's the recovery from surgery, recovery from a broken bone, all the way to I have Alzheimer's and I'm going to live here for the next 10 years while I gradually decline. So it runs the gamut. Long-term care, broadly defined, is when you can't take care of yourself and you fail to do two of the activities of daily living. If you've heard of ADLs, activities of daily living, it's toileting, transferring, dressing yourself, feeding yourself. Anyway, there's 5 of them. I don't have them all memorized, but if you can't accomplish 2, then you qualify for a long-term care event, we'll call it. What does long-term care cost? Well, some people stay home. You know, if you've got a family member, even a spouse, if your spouse is taking care of you, that's still long-term care type situation, but it probably costing you minimally. It might cost them not going to work anymore or not getting to do what they enjoy, but it's not a huge out of pocket per se. Or, you know, if you have Alzheimer's, it costs a lot. And what are your choices with dealing with long-term care? Let's walk through that. So we're talking about assisted living, home health, which is often, again, the spouse just taking care of their other spouse, or it could mean people coming in and taking care of you from a paid professional service, respite care, and skilled nursing care. I live pretty much across the street from a nursing home. I live in Metamora, and Snyder Village is our nursing home there. It costs about 120 grand to go to Snyder Village for a year. Now this slide shows averages. So it says average nationwide is 54,000 for assisted living and 108,000 for nursing home. Now there's going to be ranges there. They show you the highs and the lows. But the point is that it's a lot of money and it's pretty much somebody's salary and then some. So if you were expecting on, you know, your expenses are going to be somewhere between maybe 25, 35,000 in retirement, that's very realistic these days if you live a modest life and you just have your normal bills. But then something like this comes along, this is a huge dent in your savings, or it's a huge suck on your fixed income if that's coming out of your pension or something. So we need to consider that this could happen to you. Remember, our first slide says 70% of people need some type of long-term care. So if you fall within that 7 in 10 people, you're going to have some type of expense. So let's plan for that. Medicare is decent health coverage for people over 65, but it is not good long-term care coverage. It has its stipulations where you got to stay in hospital first. It's going to cover basically through day 100. After day 100, you're on the hook for whatever this stuff costs. So if you go to well, let's say you have a stroke, right? And so you're initially in a hospital, probably. You get some type of recovery. You get sent to a facility to get some physical therapy, recuperate, things like that. Well, first 20 days are covered. Maybe you decline or you don't improve very well. After day 100, you are paying out of pocket for that nursing home to take care of you. That means that you go from paying a somewhat reasonable limited copay from days 21 through 100 to paying potentially $100,000 or more every year to this facility to take care of you until either you pass away or move back home. So there are really two choices. I hate to say there's only two choices, but that's pretty much it. Self-insurance or long-term care insurance. Self-insurance means I plan for this and I'm going to pay for it. If that means building up your investment accounts to a point where, taking 4% a year means taking 100,000, you say, well, I can pay that bill. That's sustainable. Or you say, I know 100,000 is above and beyond 4%, but I'm still comfortable doing that because that legacy is less important to me. If I spend down my accounts and there's less left over for the next generation, I'm okay with that. I feel comfortable. And then there's long-term care, which is you shifting that risk onto an insurance company. You say, I will pay you a premium. I'm going to have my home insurance, my car insurance, and my long-term care insurance. But if my home burns down, they'll rebuild my house. If I wreck my car, they'll buy me a new car. If I go to a nursing home or have some need where other people are taking care of me, this insurance company will pay for that. This is kind of nice because it even applies to those situations where a spouse is involved. Because if your spouse is taking care of you, they are at that point a caregiver and they deserve a salary in the eyes of these insurance companies. So they can get paid just for taking care of you at home. So there's pros and cons. Obviously, it's an insurance product. Insurance companies have skyscrapers. In big cities, they make money. Why is that? Because they charge premiums. But there's a lot of pros here. Most people are married at some point. When you're entering retirement, you're not just thinking about your own health, you're thinking about the family's health. Because if you have plenty of money to pay for your own nursing home visit, and if you're a guy, because statistically guys get sick sooner than women do in life, if you go and you spend down your retirement funds, now your wife doesn't have that same flexibility because those funds were I don't want to say wasted, but they were used up on you. And now she has to go to a public Medicaid type facility and have no choice, not necessarily get the best care. So long-term care can provide that buffer that says, if I go, my wife is still protected. If she goes, I'm still protected. If we both need this, go into the facility and use up our long-term care, our kids are still going to get their inheritance. And this can be more or less important to some people, especially if you have somebody with special needs and they need to be provided for after you're gone. This would definitely be something to look at because you don't want to dip into their pot or have the nursing home come back and try to dip into their pot to recoup their costs when that person with special needs really needs those funds. There is Medicaid out there. Medicaid is for people who no longer have hardly any assets left. And if you're married, they at least let you keep your house, but they'll take everything else that you own. You're not going to have a 403B anymore. You're not going to have pretty much anything. They're going to say, we want you to have a couple $1,000s and that's it. So if you have long-term care insurance that covers those different assets and it pays instead of the nursing home coming after your assets to recoup their costs. It also gives you choice because Medicaid is not going to give you the choice. They're going to say, here's our Medicaid facilities. This is where you're going because the government has a contract with them. Versus long-term care, you say, hey, I've got this pot of money. I get to go to the best place that's going to care for me in the way that I think is appropriate. Now, another one of the cons is the complexity of it all. There's not one product, right? You go to buy car insurance, it's fairly simple. You say, I want you to buy me a new car if mine gets wrecked. And I don't want somebody else who, wrecks me to sue me. That's pretty straightforward. Long-term care, you can say a lot of things. You could say, hey, if I don't use this thing, I want to get a death benefit that recoups, some of my premium costs. Or you could say, I want the cheapest possible premium. Don't bother with the death benefit. Don't bother with any of that stuff. I just want to be covered. Other people would say, I want to buy a policy that covers both me and my wife. And if my wife doesn't use it, I want double the benefit. And if I don't use it, I want her to get double the benefit. There's all these different trade-offs, which is why, again, you should work with an advisor to go through these things and get the most appropriate policy for you, because it wouldn't be right to spend more than you really need to spend on these things, but you want to get a good benefit from them. We'll briefly talk about life insurance here. For a lot of people, in retirement, life insurance is not necessary anymore. Life insurance is to provide instant estate for those people who don't have a very large estate and need to provide for other people, or who do have a large estate and need to pay some taxes. So in the instance of a lot of us who have kids, I have 2 kids, I have life insurance. Why? Because those children need to be raised if I'm not around, and my wife needs to have the flexibility to give them what they need and pay for the things in life that they need. But somebody who, let's say they're single in retirement, there's a good chance they might not need life insurance. If you own your house outright and you don't have the mortgage anymore, that's not a huge risk. You might not need life insurance. But if you have a larger estate, and this especially applies to farmers, for example, farmers might not look rich, but they have a lot of dirt, and that dirt is worth a lot of money. And when you got a lot of money, the government likes to tax you. They might need some life insurance to make sure that the next generation who inherits all that dirt doesn't get hit with $500,000 tax bill they can't pay. The life insurance would come in and cover that tax bill for them. So it's an individualized situation, but a lot of retirees don't need it unless you're trying to provide for somebody or cover a tax bill. Let's touch on some estate planning here as well. There's a few main topics that we'll go through. Incapacity, that is when you're alive, but you can't make good decisions. The most severe example of this is Alzheimer's, dementia, right? Very bad decision making, and they shouldn't be in charge of their own healthcare decisions or property decisions at that point. So what if we can make a decision before we get that sick? Healthcare, property management, planning for the inevitable, wills and probate, some tax rules, lifetime gifting. That's if you're alive and you say, you know, I want to give to my church is a very common example, or I want to give to my grandkids. I want to help them pay for a wedding, or I want my kids, help them get a down payment for a house, something like that. We'll touch on trusts and a little bit on life insurance. Okay, so thinking about healthcare as the background to these 3 documents, you've got 3 main documents: living will, power of attorney for healthcare, and a DNR. A living will is not the same as a will, number one. If you have a living will, that does not mean that you have a will. A living will is more of an if-then type of document. If I'm in this scenario, then I want XYZ treatment. If I am in a non-responsive state and I have cancer, then I do not want life-saving treatment. I just want to be made comfortable, which is being made comfortable means that they're not trying to fix you. They're just helping you die without a lot of pain. If I'm in a situation where there's experimental drugs, I do want those experimental drugs. I do not want those experimental drugs, etc. Durable power of attorney is very important. And of all the documents, we recommend wills and powers of attorney, of the top ones that you can get. This designates somebody to make decisions for you. So whether you're not in a good state of mind or you're not physically able to, this other person can step in and say yay or nay to the doctor and give instructions. And a DNR is basically if you were to, I'm going to say die, if your heart were to stop, then do they try to bring you back so that you're no longer dead? Something to consider with these is if you move across state lines, right? If you retire to Alabama, different states will or will not honor these documents. So especially a living will and a DNR, we encourage you to meet with an attorney in the state that you ultimately settle down in to make sure that the ones that you got in Illinois are still honored in that state. So the last slide was about dealing with healthcare issues. This is about dealing with property issues. Joint ownership makes transferring ownership that much easier if you were to pass away or be incapacitated. So that means that in a very common example, you and your wife own a bank account together, right? You can write checks, she can write checks. If you're in a coma, she could still write checks. If you pass away, that account just goes to her. There isn't any probate, there's no court involved. She just goes to the bank and says, here's a death certificate. My husband passed away, please make me the sole owner. And this can apply to a lot of different accounts, bank accounts, a house, investment accounts, money market accounts, as we touched on earlier. all different types of accounts. It does not apply to 403Bs or to IRAs because for tax reasons, those are always owned by an individual. Durable power of attorney or property. So there's your healthcare power of attorney and you've got your property power of attorney. One takes care of your healthcare decisions, the other one manages your stuff. So this could be as complex as reviewing with your advisor. Let's say you've got kids, right? And as you get older, you can't represent yourself very well, or you can't get out. Your kid would meet with us and say, I am acting as a fiduciary for my mother. I'm her power of attorney. We want to review the account and make appropriate updates. Great, we can do that. It can also be as simple as grandma went to a nursing home. Grandma's never going to drive again. Let's sell grandma's car to our cousin because he could use a car and she doesn't need it. So just taking care of those things rather than involving the courts every time there's some type of decision, which is a huge hassle and expense. And then a living trust, which is a type of trust. Basically, you have this trust set up, which we'll dive into here in a moment. And while you're alive, you are in charge of it. You can make changes if necessary. It just acts as a vehicle to keep all your stuff. If you don't have an estate plan, then you are intestate, which is a legal term meaning you don't have one, and now the courts get to decide, and people could be fighting over your stuff or fighting over the right to make decisions for you. So we encourage you to just put a plan in place, update the plan as necessary, involve your advisor, involve an attorney. We work with attorneys that we have worked with for many years, and we trust them to do a good job. So if you don't know somebody, we do. But the point is get these things in place because it's just going to makes it so much easier if you have a roadmap instead of trying to make decisions in the moment, right? Because think about if your kids are trying to take care of you, or if you're trying to take care of your parents, you're already stressed out because the reason that you're in that situation is because they're not doing well. And then you have to try to invent things as you go. Or if you just have a roadmap that says, here's my living will. I want to be put on hospice. I want to be made comfortable. Please don't try to save me. Please just make me comfortable. There's no guilt on their part. They say, hey, I'm just following the instructions. This is exactly what they wanted. So we really encourage you to just build that roadmap and make it easy. Always name beneficiaries. Naming beneficiaries keeps this stuff out of the courts, and it prevents delays and it prevents accidents. So for example, if you don't name a beneficiary on your 403B or your 401k, it can go to a court because it has to go through the estate now, and the estate can go through probate, and then they have to decide who's the most appropriate beneficiary. Or you could list your kids, the kids call and say, mom passed away, here's her death certificate, and now they own the account. It's super simple. There's no fees involved. There's no delays. But we would encourage you to update beneficiaries. We have certainly had instances where people got divorced and remarried and did not bother to update their beneficiaries. And that was an interesting conversation many years later because the ex-wife or the ex-husband actually got the money. So just pay attention to those things. And I will say, in case I wasn't super clear, beneficiaries stay out of the courts. Unless there's some discrepancy over who the beneficiary should be, as long as you name the person, it just goes straight to that person. The next thing we'll talk about is probate and wills. So wills are probated. Now in Illinois, if you have less than 100,000 total to your name, if you lived very modestly, you can, in most cases, get out of going to the courts. That's considered a small quote unquote estate, but most people are going to have more than 100,000 when you think about the fact that they have a house, you've got cars, you've got investment accounts, you've got stuff in your house, right? You can sell that couch for money. So the probate process just involves whoever was the executor in your will is going to present the will, say, I need to distribute the assets according to what the will says. The court oversees it to make sure that they're acting ethically and in a timely manner. And for all their trouble, the court is compensated by charging fees. So that's one reason, we'll talk about trusts here in a moment. That's one reason people use trusts is to avoid going through the courts. And the probate process is not overnight. If you've got to sell a house, obviously you have to find a buyer, but also just getting things done and getting things, the stamp of approval from a judge, from an attorney, all that stuff, it's never overnight. It can take a couple months. Oh, the other thing I would add, if you have property in multiple states, if you plan to be a snowbird where you have a Florida house and an Illinois house, you're going to have probate filed in both states. You're going to have two separate processes, one for each state. And that's additional delay. Not that that's necessarily a problem. Remember, things that go slowly hopefully have more oversight and are done correctly the first time. But in terms of the assets actually getting into the hands of the next generation, just plan for there to be a bit of a delay. If that means that you need to buy some life insurance in order to get some cash in hand immediately, or just make a certain person a beneficiary on one of your accounts so they can get cash in hand immediately, then that might be what it takes, because it could take a couple months to actually sell all your stuff and move it over to their ownership via probate. So what are trusts exactly? Trusts are vehicles. Think of it like a suitcase. They're vehicles that you can put stuff in, and it operates as its own entity. The reason people use trusts is for increased control. I'll give you an example. I have two kids and I have life insurance. Our kids have an appointed guardian if both my wife and I were to pass. Obviously, if only I die, my wife will take care of the kids. She'll get the life insurance. But let's say we're both gone. My life insurance has a beneficiary if my wife is gone, which is the guardian that'll raise our children. Technically speaking, if I just make them the beneficiary, they can take my life insurance payment and they can go buy bricks of gold and take a crazy vacation and never give a dime to our kids. And that's perfectly legal because they were the beneficiary. If I implement a trust and say, I want this trust to give me increased control over my money after I'm gone, I can make the trust the beneficiary of my life insurance. So a big chunk of money goes into the trust. And then the trust says, the guardian of my children can use this money for these purposes. They can use it to pay for medical expenses, educational expenses, living expenses, etc. So there's more accountability there and a guideline of what the money can be used for. A lot of grandparents might use this if they're trying to give money upon death to their children or grandchildren. They might say, after you get your bachelor's degree, you get half of the money you're supposed to inherit. After you turn 35 years old, you get the other half, right? They're trying to plan for the maturity phases of somebody's life. Another example where it might be used is in a special needs situation, right? I have a brother with special needs. He can never make financial decisions on his own. He doesn't have that capability. But if we were to put money in a trust and say, this is there to pay for housing expenses, to pay for medical expenses, all that stuff throughout his life, then he has something set aside that is technically not his, but it is for him to use under the guidance of somebody else. The other thing that trusts do is that they avoid probate. So if privacy is something that you highly value, because probate does go through the courts and everything the court does can be published, then a trust could be used, but also it can be a bit more timely. You know, I said beneficiaries, it just goes to the next person. Same thing with a trust. If somebody passes away, you just follow the instructions of the trust. You don't have to involve the courts. So it's another way to avoid probate there. The trust has a few main components. I often kind of compare it to the Constitution. I don't know why, but that's an easy comparison for me. But it's a document that says, here's what needs to happen, and here are the rules. And so you're not inventing things as you go along, you're just following the document. You have a grantor, meaning the person who funds the account, whether that's saying, I want to put my house in the trust, that makes you a grantor. I want to put my Caterpillar stock in the trust, you're the grantor. Anything that you put in, you're the grantor. You've then got the trust agreement, which depending on the type of trust you set up can either be changed as you see fit or not. So there's revocable and irrevocable trusts. Not to get in the weeds too much, but revocable means you can amend it during your lifetime, right? If you said, my assets go 50-50 to two of my kids, and then one of your kids wins the lottery and they're a multimillionaire. Now you go back and you amend the trust document and you say, actually, it all just goes to my one kid who did not win the lottery. And then you've got irrevocable trusts. This is less popular for the average person, but farmers use it a lot to make sure that their property always stays in their family and that the great-great-grandson doesn't just sell it to buy a Camaro or something. But irrevocable trusts are also used to insulate assets from nursing homes, because they can be used to completely shield assets where a nursing home cannot go after them and recoup their costs. So a revocable trust, in most situations, you're going to be the trustee. The trustee is the person who manages everything. They're in charge of following that trust document and acting upon it. While you're alive, you're probably going to be the trustee of your own trust. It's only there to be a suitcase for your convenience. Now, after you die, there's a successor trustee. That could be your spouse, that could be a kid, it can even be a bank. If you don't have somebody that you trust to act right, you can appoint a bank to do that. And they, again, they just follow the trust document. And if you're supposed to gift your collectible car to Timmy and your gun collection to Joey and your jewelry to Zoe, they'll just do that. It's already written out in the trust document. And the beneficiaries, those are the people, in my example, I used, I think, Timmy, Joey, and Zoe. Those would be the beneficiaries. They're the ones who get the money ultimately. So it's not just something that movie stars use. I mean, farmers use these things all the time. That's why you see all these banks called so-and-so bank and trust. Why? Because every farmer in the area is interested in the trust to preserve their land. But also everyday people have trust because whether it's a special needs situation or just a desire to really control how their money is used after their death, you can get a trust for really any amount of money at all. Lifetime gifting, this is where you give money before you die. Instead of waiting to make them beneficiaries, you say, I want to write a check to you. I want to help you graduate college. I want to help you get married, whatever it might be. So it was 17,000 last year. It's 18,000 this year. That's how much money you can give to an individual without it counting against you one day when you die. And I'll explain that in a moment here. So there is an estate tax limit. In Illinois, it's $4 million. At the federal level, it is about $12 million, but it changes year to year. And technically that legislation expires in the future and it could come down. They might renew it, but we don't make those types of projections. We're just trying to act on what we know today. If you give more than $18,000, you're reducing that amount. So let's say you give $50,000 to one of your kids. That's well above and beyond 18,000. So that comes off of your lifetime limit. Instead of giving 4 million tax-free in Illinois, upon your death, now you're down to 3,900,000 and whatever the math is. A lot of people don't picture this as being a problem because you say, hey, $4 million, that's a lot of money. That's right, but if you're married to a farmer, you probably have a good amount of dirt that you guys own, and it could be worth a lot of money in the future. Earlier, we talked about inflation. Inflation doubling prices over 25 years. If you own $1 million worth of land now, by the time you die, it's probably worth $2-3 million. If you own more, if you own 3 million right now, it's going to be worth a ton of money when you're older. So these are actual considerations to think about. As long as you stay under $18,000 per person, that means you can write one to grandkid A and another check to grandkid B, and that's fine. You can do it to as many people as you want. Then you don't have to worry about the gift tax exclusion. The other thing to consider with gifting is step up in basis. This means whether or not the event is going to be taxable for you or for the person who gets it. I'll give you a simple example. You buy a house and it's $50,000 and you bought this house in 1980. Today, it's worth $100,000. You're considering, should you give it to your kid now or should you give it to your kid upon death? If you give it to your kid now, they're not going to get a step up in basis, meaning you gift it to them, they get a house worth $100,000 that was purchased at 50, and they have a $50,000 taxable gain. So that's a potential tax consequence to them. If you wait until you die, they get a $100,000 house with zero taxable gain because it stepped up to the date of death. Same thing counts with stock accounts. If you own a lot of Caterpillar stock and you have a massive gain in that account and you go to gift it to a person, they could be taxed for that gain. Now you wait until you die, it resets and they don't have any taxable gain. It's actually a fantastic inheritance at that point. This is another reason why if you want to give to your church, you can give them appreciated stock to avoid that gain for yourself, and they get to keep the full gift. So if you're interested in gifting to charities and churches, talk to us more as well, because we do a lot of planning around that too. Lastly, this is just from our experience. We wanted to add this in here. Make sure that you have a reason to wake up in the morning, because if you don't, to put it bluntly, it's easier for you to fall apart and begin to die, because people need a purpose. I mean, we're social animals. We need something that drives us. So I would encourage you to have these things lined up before you retire. Don't think that you're going to get into it afterwards. Actually have a plan for retirement, because if you sit at home, your health will deteriorate and it won't be as enjoyable. So get involved, make sure that you still have a reason to wake up and feel worthwhile. So next steps, we've covered a lot of stuff tonight. I said that we would cover a lot of topics and hopefully shine a light on different blind spots if you have any before retirement. We want to approach all of these different topics. We want to have good planning conversations, make sure your income is covered, and make sure that our asset allocation, our different buckets are lined up in a way that provides that income in perpetuity, not just today, but when you're 90. We want to think about taxes, manage our risks. Remember, we talked about those 5 big risk factors, including healthcare. Make sure our estate plan is in order and up to date. And if it's not, please talk to us and we'll help you do that. Understand how our pension is going to work and how it works alongside Social Security. Plan for our RMDs. If we want to give, then have a plan to do that in a tax efficient way. And then we can also discuss Roth conversions. It's not a huge topic, so we didn't cover it here, but that is something some people do. If you were to work with us, in a way we already work together, because we do your 403(b) and hopefully meet with you each year. But if you want to have a deeper relationship where we try to help guide you through that retirement process, work with you and your family, and then throughout retirement, provide good income and good advice. The way we work is we have a 2-meeting process where we initially meet with you and just get to know what is important to you. Number one, what are your fears? What are your hopes? What is a snapshot of what you currently have versus a picture of where you want to be? So that first meeting is a lot of questions and no recommendations. It's just us learning. And then from there may be homework, right? Your Social Security snapshot, different ideas of where you stand in terms of bank accounts, investment accounts, etc., what you think your budget looks like, what you think you're going to need for income. And from there, we're beginning to understand who you are, what's important to you. We can assess those things. And then in a second meeting, we sit down and say, okay, we've done a lot of homework. You've done a lot of homework. We've got a plan in place and we want to walk through this with you and explain why this will work. And if there's something that you want to tweak, absolutely great. It's your plan. But our job is to design a plan that fits well with your family and your goals, and that provides for you today and tomorrow and hopefully forever. And then, of course, last step is implement the plan and make it work. That's all that I have to share tonight, but I think that you can tell that we have a lot of things on our minds as financial planners. These are some things that we think about when we initially meet somebody and say, hi, it's nice to meet you. How can we help? This is what is already going on in our brain of, okay, we need to learn about these things. We need to solve these problems, overcome these issues. But we want to put it on your radar. If you want to talk to us more about these things, just reach out. We'd be happy to help you. We do not charge for consultations or anything like that. We're just happy to help. So give us a call, shoot me an email. We have a team here, so work with Scott, Nick, Nathan, myself, whoever you're familiar with from meeting with in the fall each year. Thank you.